Now, it's no secret that your energy costs are going up across the board. Gas bills are going up by just as much as your bills are. A mate of mine recently received a letter from Origin Energy estimating his annual gas bill would go up by about $1,000 a year. Now, he could afford to pay that because he's my accountant, so he'll just steal some more of my money. But for most of us, this has reached a point where we have to make sacrifices. Need I remind you? Your power bill was meant to drop by $275 under an Albanese government.
Power prices down by 2025, $275.
Household prices by $275.
Prices down by $275 a year.
Reducing power prices by $275. That will reduce power prices by $275. $275. $275 a year. $275.
So much for that. But there's another price hike on the way, this time at the fuel bowser. Now, last night, I spoke to Credit Suisse energy analyst Saul Kavonic about a recent decision from OPEC, the Organisation of Petroleum Exporting Countries, to cut oil production by more than 1 million barrels a day from early May. This announcement immediately resulted in an increase in the price of crude oil, which isn't much of a surprise, but it will continue to cause price rises at the petrol bowser. Fuel is predicted to hit as much as $2.20 a litre in the coming weeks. Now, this was a sudden and unpredicted announcement, so it begs the question, why would OPEC cut production of oil? This is a bit of what Saul told me last night.
Western nations, the OECD, most of the US, but including countries like Australia, have really dropped the ball on producing our own oil supply. So now we've really given the power back to the likes of OPEC, the Saudis, the Russians, who feel they can now have control and can squeeze prices. And in this environment, if you're a big oil and gas investor, you're simply saying, look, it's too hard to invest in places like Australia. There's nothing wrong with, obviously at some point we need to decarbonise and at some point we need to do all those green investments and so on. I mean, the real question is, why are we shutting down what works today before that new green future has actually arrived?
This is a story that has received scant coverage, but it is one of great importance. I've also written about this for The Advertiser tomorrow. But what Saul basically said there is that our climate and environmental policies have led to a situation where Australia no longer produces oil, which means we're left at the mercy of a cartel of oil-producing nations like Saudi Arabia. And they, of course, know that we need their oil because we don't have any of our own. We need it to keep our cars moving and keep the lights on. So even when oil prices are already high, they can say overnight, oh, well, we're just going to cut the supply of oil. And then we have to pay even more for a diminishing resource. We only have about 3 weeks of usable fuel in reserve in this country. We have to import it. We've backed ourselves into a corner here, and as is so often the case with these loony-greeny policies, the rich get richer in the name of saving the environment, while ordinary Australians tighten their belts and fork out more and more just to maintain a decent standard of living. The whole thing is a scam. Australia had 8 oil refineries at the turn of the century. By 2020, we were down to 4. And then within the space of 4 months, half of those went offline. There are now just 2 oil refineries in Australia, one in Geelong and one in Brisbane. The federal government tipped in $2.3 billion in 2021 to keep them going until at least 2030, because without them, we would be completely and utterly reliant on imports. Our energy security, particularly when it comes to petrol, sits in the hands of a few predominantly Middle Eastern countries, and they can demand whatever price they want. Now, this has happened because governments, both state and federal, have been off with the fairies, obsessing over renewable energy instead of looking at what is right in front of them. They have, as Saul said earlier, created a hostile environment for gas and oil producers in this country, so no one wants to invest in it. They've diverted money to more expensive forms of renewable energy that don't yet have the capacity to meet our needs, and they've funded environmental outfits that oppose the oil and gas projects we need to maintain some level of sovereignty over our fuel supply. And the consequence is that the rich get richer and you get poorer. The Financial Review's economics editor John Keogh belled the cat today when he wrote that, quote, "The transition to cleaner energy is becoming a tax break and subsidy gravy train for high income earners and the wealthy." He continued, "Hard-working taxpayers are funding all sorts of federal and state concessions for electric vehicles, solar panels and electrification of homes, while the less fortunate struggle to afford their energy bills. People with above average incomes and wealth who can afford electric vehicles, solar panels, batteries, new heating and cooling systems benefit disproportionately. People who can't afford these clean technologies will miss out." And that is exactly how things have gone. Bully to you if you can afford a Tesla, but most of us can't. So we have to pay the rising fuel prices caused by governments killing our oil industry. Coal-fired power stations keep closing down because it's no longer economically viable for them to operate. The big energy producers would rather get into the renewable energy game because it's more profitable for them to do that, and it's more profitable for them to do that because it's where the governments have sent all the money. But has that resulted in a reduction in your power bills? Of course it hasn't. It's just caused them to go up. Treasurer Jim Chalmers and many other politicians have previously tried to blame rising power bills on the war in Ukraine. And yes, it has caused a supply crunch that has had a worldwide inflationary effect on energy prices. But we've created our own energy shortfall in this country. At one point in May last year, nearly a third of the country's coal-fired power plants were turned off, either for maintenance or because they'd broken down. That happened because energy producers weren't investing in them because they could make more money investing in renewable energy. It's simple market forces. When there's less supply, prices go up. And this lack of supply, both with petrol and power, has been caused by green climate policies. As you pay more, renewable energy investors and producers line their pockets. I mean, does anyone seriously think people like billionaire and climate crusader Mike Cannon-Brookes staged a takeover of the AGL board because he wanted to do a good thing for the world and reduce emissions? Of course not. Cannon-Brookes and the rest of AGL's shareholders want to make more money, and they've recognised these days they can make more money in renewable energy. It doesn't matter whether or not the consumer has to pay more. They just know they can see better profit margins. I mean, why might Simon Holmes à Court, the son of Australia's first billionaire and a man who has vast investments in decarbonisation and renewable energy ventures, have spent so much money helping get Teal independents who ran on a climate change agenda elected to federal parliament? This stuff always gets couched in terms of what is good for the planet, but so often it's about what's good for the bank balances of the people who already have piles of money. And we are the schmucks who are forced to make them richer.